continue reading Carmilla. We have about 6 chapters. We have 6 chapters left. So we're almost certainly going to finish tonight unless there's a time dilation and I can suddenly read like 1 word a minute or something. So that's probably not going to happen. When we do that, we will finish off Carmilla. We're going to start. Where was it? I closed that because, of course, I did. I have our next book is also by Bram Stoker. Is called The Jewel of the 7 Stars. Actually, it's called Jewel of 7 Stars, not The 7 Stars. That's just make that little correction there. Yeah, that took me a while to get my brain around. The book is not The Jewel of the 7 Stars. It is The Jewel of 7 Stars. I guess the jewel has stars in them of number 7. But yes. Yes, we will deal with that when we get to it. Actually, we will never deal with that. It's been dealt with. It's the title of the book. I don't have to worry about it. But yeah, we are just finished chapter 10, if I remember correctly. And I remember because I looked it up. And what was that one called? That was The Bereaved. Oh, right. There was, I find it hard to remember what's happened in this story. It's been a lot of the girls talking to each other. But there was a funeral, right? And our girls were watching the procession, and Carmilla was distressed by the proceedings of the funeral. Beautiful, yeah. Yeah, I don't even, like, I'm reading a few of the words I don't even remember. I don't think I've, I don't dislike this. I don't remember disliking the story, but I obviously don't remember it. She was distressed, but yeah, by the hymns, sure. They were painful to her, which I guess is a hint. But, this is, where was the last paragraph? Was this? Oh, okay, yeah. So at the end of the last chapter, they met up with the general, whose daughter and or niece has died and or is being threatened. The guy sold them charms against vampires. Right. Did he? Why the hell does she wear one? Doesn't make any sense. They're going to a ruined castle. Not Junestall. Where was it? The House of Karnstein, he said. Yeah, and that family has been long extinct, at least 100 years, and going over there for a picnic or something. They're going to investigate something, right? They They met the general on the way, and the general is going to join them. The general has been investigating the mysterious circumstances of the demise of his family, and has come to the conclusion that he must visit the ruined castle to look for monks, to look for monsters and put them down. So we have this idea that we're going to go there. He's going to dig up the graves and kill them. He's going to kill the dead people. I think that's what it was. Perhaps. Yes, we're going to go with that. Let's see what the story says. All right, here we are. Chapter 11, The Story. With all my heart, said the general, with an effort, and after a short pause in which to arrange his subject, he commenced one of the strangest narratives I ever heard. My dear child was looking forward with great pleasure to the visit you had been so good as to arrange for her to your charming daughter. Maybe she was going to visit her before the story started. Here he made me a gallant but melancholy bow. In the meantime, we had an invitation to my old friend the Count Karsfeld, it's always the Counts, whose Skoros is about 6 leagues to the other side of Karnstein. It was to attend the series of fetes which, you remember, were given by him in honor of his illustrious visitor, the Grand Duke Charles. Yes, and very splendid I believe they were, said my father. Princely? Princely? But then his hospitalities are quite regal. Technically, yes. He has Aladdin's lamp. The night from which my sorrow dates was devoted to a magnificent masquerade. The grounds were thrown open, the trees hung with colored lamps. There was such a display of fireworks as Paris itself had never witnessed. And such music. Music, you know, is my weakness. Such ravishing music. The finest instrumental band, perhaps, in the world, and the finest singers who could be collected from all the great operas in Europe. As you wandered through these fantastically illuminated grounds, the moon-lighted chateau throwing a rosy light from its long rows of windows, you would suddenly hear these ravishing voices stealing from the silence of some grove, or rising from the boats upon the lake. I felt myself, as I looked and listened, carried back into the romance and poetry of my early youth. When the fireworks were ended, and the ball beginning, we returned to the noble suite of rooms that were thrown open to the dancers. A masked ball, you know, is a beautiful sight, but so brilliant a spectacle of the kind I never saw before. It was a very aristocratic assembly. I was myself almost the only nobody present. My dear child, she was looking quite beautiful. She wore no mask. Her excitement and delight added an unspeakable charm to her features. Always lovely. I remarked a young lady dressed magnificently but wearing a mask, who appeared to me to be observing my ward with extraordinary interest. I had seen her earlier in the evening in the great hall, and again for a few minutes walking near us on the terrace under the castle windows, similarly employed. A lady, also masked, richly and gravely dressed, and with a stately air, like a person of rank, accompanied her as a chaperone. Had the young lady not worn a mask, I could, of course, have been much more certain upon the question whether she was really watching my poor darling. I am now well assured that she was. We were now in one of the salons. The salons. The saloons? It's going to be saloons, but there's one O, and that really just trips my brain over. We were now in one of the saloons. My poor dear child had been dancing, and was resting a little in one of the chairs next to the door. I was standing near. The two ladies I have mentioned had approached the younger took the chair next to my ward, while her companion stood beside me, and for a little time addressed herself in a low tone to her charge. Salon? I guess it's, thanks. It's a living room. It's a salon, but it looks like it should be saloon. Okay, salon. Fair enough. Right, low tone to her charge. Availing herself of the privilege of her mask, she turned to me, and in the tone of an old friend, and calling me by my name, opened a conversation with me, which piqued my curiosity a good deal. She referred to many scenes where she had met me at court, and at distinguished houses. She alluded to the little incidents which I had long ceased to think of, but which, I found, had only lain in abeyance in my memory, for they instantly started into life at her touch. That actually makes me think would be a great spell in D&D. You know how like there's the spell Friends or whatever? It's a pretty pathetic spell, but like swapping that out with something that's you sort of trigger in the person you're talking to these like vague memories that they had quote unquote forgotten, but every time you bring something up, they suddenly remember it, and you grow a familiarity with one another. If you're into like really RP heavy style games, your DM could let you role play that scene out, and the more creative you are, the more effective the spell could be at that instant. Or you could just be a roll if you don't care, for doing the RP or what have you. But I find this a really interesting way to develop that familiarity and define the friendship part of friends. Anyhow, that random side thought aside. Where were we? I became more and more curious to ascertain who she was every moment. She parried my attempts to discover very adroitly and pleasantly. The knowledge she showed of my many passages in my life seemed to me all but unaccountable, and she appeared to take a not unnatural pleasure in foiling my curiosity and in seeing me flounder in my eager perplexity from one conjecture to another. In the meantime, the young lady whom her mother called by the odd name of Milarka. Yeah, it's Milarka. I want there to be an I in there. When she once or twice addressed her, had, with the same ease and grace, got into conversation with my ward. She introduced herself by saying that her mother was a very old acquaintance of mine. She spoke of the agreeable audacity which a mask rendered practicably. She talked like a friend. She admired her dress and insinuated very prettily her admiration of her beauty. She amused her with laughing criticisms upon the people who crowded the ballroom and laughed at my poor child's fun. She was very witty and lively when she pleased, and after a time they had grown very good friends. Your definition of friendship is poor, my friend. And the young stranger lowered her mask, displaying a remarkably beautiful face. I had never seen it before, neither had my dear child, but though it were new to us, the features were so engaging, as well as lovely, that it was impossible not to feel the attraction powerfully. My poor girl did so. I never saw anyone more taken with another at first sight, unless, indeed, it was the stranger herself, who seemed quite to have lost her heart to her. In the meantime, availing myself of the license of a masquerade, I put not a few questions to the elder lady. "You have puzzled me utterly," I said, laughing. "Is that not enough? Won't you now consent to stand on equal terms and do me the kindness to remove your mask?" "Can any request be more unreasonable?" she replied. "Ask a lady to yield an advantage. Beside, how do you know you should recognize me? Years make changes." "As you see," I said, with a bow and I suppose a rather melancholy little laugh. "As philosophers tell us," she said. "How do you know that a sight of my face would help you?" "I should take chance for that," I answered. "It is vain trying to make yourself out an old woman. Your figure betrays you." "Years, nevertheless, have passed since I saw you. Rather since you saw me. For that is what I am considering. Milarka there is my daughter. I cannot then be young, even in the opinion of people whom time has taught to be indulgent, and I may not like to be compared with with what you remember me." Well, he doesn't remember you, so you got nothing to be compared against right now. And this is like a very accurate recreation of a conversation this guy had a year ago. It's very impressive. "You have no mask to remove. You can offer me nothing in exchange. My petition is to your pity to remove it, and mine to yours to let it stay where it is," she replied. "Well then, at least you will tell me whether you are French or German. You speak both languages so perfectly." "I don't think I shall tell you that, General. You intend a surprise, and are meditating the particular point of attack. At all events, you won't deny this," I said, that being honored by your permission to converse, I ought to know how to address you. Shall I say Madame la Comtesse? La Comtesse? No, there's no La Comtesse. Comtesse. Words. They suck. She laughed, and she would no doubt have met me with another evasion if indeed I can treat any occurrence in an interview, every circumstance of which was prearranged, as I now believe, with the profoundest cunning and liable to be modified by accident. As to that, she began, but she was interrupted, almost as she opened her lips, by a gentleman dressed in black, who looked particularly elegant and distinguished, with this drawback, that his face was the most deadly pale I ever saw except in death. He was in no masquerade, in the plain evening dress of a gentleman, and he said, without a smile, but with a courtly and unusual low bow, "Will Madame la Comtesse permit me to say a very few words which may interest her?" What is Madame la Comtesse? This seems to be not a person or a title. Here, this is what it is. That's what I'm trying to say. Madame la, I have down pretty good. Comtesse it feels wrong in my bones. I want to say Comtesse because that feels right, but that's obviously not how that's pronounced. Obviously, I've been so correct about everything. The meaning of Comtesse is countess. So she is a countess, at least that's what they're referring to her as. Is there like a pronunciation guide or something? That would be cool. I don't even want to like hear. I just want to see. I just want like a dictionary version of a pronunciation guide. Comtesse from Comet Con SS. Comtessa. Oh, there's a Comtessa. Okay, well, sure. Comtessa. All right, we'll probably never even say it. We'll probably never ever even see it again. The lady turned quickly to him and touched her lip in token of silence. Then she then said to me, "Keep my place for me, General. I shall return when I have said a few words." And with this injunction playfully given, she walked a little aside with the gentleman in black and talked for some minutes, apparently very earnestly. They then walked away slowly together in the crowd, and I lost them for some minutes. I spent the interval in cudgeling my brains for a conjecture as to the identity of the lady who seemed to remember me so kindly, and I was thinking of turning about and joining in the conversation between my pretty ward and the Countess's daughter, and trying whether by the time she returned I might not have a surprise in store for her, by having her name, title, chateau, and the estates at my fingers' ends. But at this moment she returned, accompanied by the pale man in black, who said, "I shall return and inform Madame la Comtesse when her carriage is at the door." He withdrew with a bow. Chapter 12, a petition. "Then we are to lose Madame la Comtesse, but I hope only for a few hours," I said with a low bow. It may be that only, or it may be a few weeks. It was very unlucky his speaking to me just now as he did. Do you know me?" I assured her I did not. "You shall know me," she said, "but not at present. We are older and better friends than perhaps you suspect. I cannot yet declare myself. I shall in 3 weeks pass your beautiful Skoras, about which I have been making inquiries. I shall then look in upon you for an hour or two, and renew a friendship which I never think of without 1,000 pleasant recollections. This moment a piece of news has reached me like a thunderbolt. I must set out now, and travel by a devious route, nearly 100 miles, with all the dispatch I can possibly make. My perplexities multiply. I am only deterred by the compulsory reserve I practice as to my name from making a very singular request of you. My poor child has not quite recovered her strength. Her horse fell with her at a hunt which she had ridden out to witness. Her nerves have not yet recovered the shock, and our physician says that she must on no account exert herself for some time to come. We came here in consequence, by very easy stages, hardly 6 leagues a day. I must now travel day and night, on a mission of life and death, a mission the critical and momentous nature of which I shall be able to explain to you when we meet, as I hope we shall in a few weeks, without the necessity of any concealment. She went on to make her petition, and it was in the tone of a person from whom such a request amounted to conferring rather than seeking a favor. This was only in manner, and, as it seemed, quite unconsciously. Then the terms in which was expressed nothing could be more deprecatory. I don't know why this word is being used here. The terms are being deprecated. Okay. It was simply that I would consent to take charge of her daughter during her absence. This was, all things considered, a strange, not to say an audacious request. She, in some sort, disarmed me, by stating and admitting everything that could be urged against it, and throwing herself entirely upon my chivalry. At the same moment, by a fatality that seems to have predetermined all that happened, my poor child came to my side and, in an undertone, besought me to invite her new friend, meeriart, to pay us a visit. She had just been sounding her, and thought, if Mamma would allow her, she would like it extremely. At another time I should have told her to wait a little, until at least we knew who they were, but I had not a moment to think in. The 2 ladies assailed me together, and I must confess the refined and beautiful face of the young lady, about which there was something extremely engaging, as well as the elegance and fire of high birth, determined me, and, quite overpowered, I submitted, and undertook too easily the care of the young lady whom her mother called meeriart. The Countess beckoned to her daughter, who listened with grave attention while she told her in general terms how suddenly and peremptorily she had been summoned, and also of the arrangement she had made for her under my care, adding that I was one of her earliest and most valued friends. I made, of course, such speeches as the case seemed to call for, and found myself, on reflection, in a position which I did not half like. The gentleman in black returned, and very ceremoniously conducted the lady from the room. The demeanor of this gentleman was such as to impress me with the conviction of the Countess was a lady of very much more importance than her modest title alone might have led me to assume. Windows is all like, you have a security alert, and it went away too quickly for me to read, so it probably meant that nothing was wrong. That did remind me to set my phone to do not disturb, though. And I lost my place. Let's see, the gentleman in black returned. Her title alone. Okay, her last charge to me was that no attempt was to be made to learn more about her than I might have already guessed until her return. Our distinguished host, whose guest she was, knew her reasons. But here, she said, neither I nor my daughter could safely remain for more than a day. I removed my mask imprudently for a moment about an hour ago, and, too late, I fancied you saw me. So I resolved to seek an opportunity of talking a little to you. Had I found that you had seen me, I would have thrown myself on your high sense of honor to keep my secret some weeks. As it is, I am satisfied that you did not see me. But if you now suspect, or on reflection should suspect who I am, I commit myself in like manner entirely to your honor. My daughter will observe the same secrecy, and I know well that you will from time to time remind her, lest she should thoughtlessly disclose it. She whispered a few words to her daughter, kissed her hurriedly twice, and went away, accompanied by the pale gentleman in black, and disappeared in the crowd. In the next room, said Milarka, there is a window that looks upon the hall door. I should like to see the last of Mama and to kiss my hand to her. Very accurate retelling of what happened in the past. A general should be like a spy or something. We ascended, of course, and accompanied her to the window. We looked out and saw a handsome old-fashioned carriage with a troop of couriers and footmen. We saw the slim figure of the pale gentleman in black as he held a thick velvet cloak and placed it about her shoulders and threw the hood over her head. She nodded to him and just touched his hand with hers. He bowed low repeatedly as the door closed and the carriage began to move. She is gone, said Milarka with a sigh. She is gone, I repeated to myself for the first time, in the hurried moments that had elapsed since my consent, reflecting upon the folly of my act. She did not look up, said the young lady plaintively. The Countess had taken off her mask, perhaps, and did not care to show her face, I said, and she could not know that you were in the window. She sighed and looked at my face. She was so beautiful that I relented. I was sorry I had for a moment repented of my hospitality, and I determined to make her amends for the unavowed churlishness of my reception. The young lady, replacing her mask, joined my ward in persuading me to return to the grounds, where the concert was soon to be renewed. We did so and walked up and down the terrace that lies under the castle windows. Milarka became very intimate with us and amused us with lively descriptions and stories of most of the great people whom we saw upon the terrace. I liked her more and more every minute. Her gossip, without being ill-natured, was extremely diverting to me, who had been so long out of the great world. I thought what life she would give to our sometimes lonely evenings at home. This ball was not over until the morning sun had almost reached the horizon. It pleased the Grand Duke to dance till then, so loyal people could not go away or think of bed. That sounds like torture to me. We had just got through the crowded saloon, and this time it is saloon, when my ward asked me what had become of Milarka. I thought she had been by her side, and she fancied she was by mine. The fact was, we had lost her. All my efforts to find her were vain. I feared that she had mistaken, in the confusion of a momentary separation from us, other people for her new friends, and had, possibly, pursued and lost them in the extensive grounds which were thrown open to us. Now it is in full force. I recognized a new folly in my having undertaken the charge of a young lady without so much as knowing her name. Yeah, you should have asked that by now, I suspect, yes. And fettered as I was by promises of the reasons for imposing which I knew nothing, I could not even point my inquiries by saying that the missing young lady was the daughter of the Countess who had taken her departure a few hours before. Morning broke. It was clear daylight before I gave up my search. It was not till near 2 o'clock next day that we heard anything of my missing charge. At about that time, a servant knocked at my niece's door to say that he had been earnestly requested by a young lady who appeared to be in great distress to make out where she could find the General Baron Spielsdorf and the young lady his daughter, in whose charge she had been left by her mother. There could be no doubt, notwithstanding the slight inaccuracy, that our young friend had turned up, and so she had. Would to heaven we had lost her. She told my poor child a story to account for her having failed to recover us for so long. Very late, she said. She had got to the housekeeper's bedroom in despair of finding us, and had then fallen into a deep sleep which, long as it was, had hardly sufficed to recruit her strength after the fatigues of the ball. That day, Milarka came home with us. I was only too happy, after all, to have secured so charming a companion for my dear girl. His attitude towards her seems to grow hot and cold, not surprisingly, with respect to how long he's been in her presence. Maybe that's just me that's seen that, but that's definitely something I've noticed. Chapter 13, The Woodman. There soon, however, appeared some drawbacks. In the first place, Milarka complained of extreme languor, the weakness that remained after her late illness, and she never emerged from her room till the afternoon was pretty far advanced. In the next place, it was accidentally discovered, although she always locked her door on the inside, and never disturbed the key from its place till she admitted the maid to assist at her toilet, that she was undoubtedly sometimes absent from her room in the very early morning, and at various times later in the day before she wished it to be understood that she was stirring. She was repeatedly seen from the windows of the skolas in the first faint gray of the morning, walking through the trees in an easterly direction and looking like a person in a trance. This convinced me that she walked in her sleep. But this hypothesis did not solve the puzzle. How did she pass out from her room, leaving the door locked on the inside? How did she escape from the house without unbarring door or window? In the midst of my perplexities, an anxiety of a far more urgent kind presented itself. My dear child began to lose her looks and health, and that in a manner so mysterious and even horrible that I became thoroughly frightened. She was at first visited by appalling dreams, then, as she fancied, by a spectre, sometimes resembling Milarka, sometimes in the shape of a beast indistinctly seen, walking around the foot of her bed from side to side. Oh dear, aren't all these just very familiar events? Lastly came sensations. One not unpleasant but very peculiar, she said, resembled the flow of an icy stream against her breast. And at a later time, she felt something like a pair of large needles pierce her, a little below the throat, with a very sharp pain. A few nights after, followed a gradual and convulsive sense of strangulation. Then came unconsciousness. Yes, it's like the last couple of chapters is just a general repeating the story we've read so far. I could hear distinctly every word the kind old general was saying, because by this time we were driving upon the short grass that spreads on either side of the road as you approach the roofless village which had not shown the smoke of a chimney for more than half a century. You may guess how strangely I felt as I heard my own symptoms so exactly described in those which had been experienced by the poor girl who, but for the catastrophe which followed, would have been at that moment a visitor at my father's chateau. It would be really funny if after every sentence or event he described, she would speak up and go like, "Oh, that happened to me." Or, hey Carmilla, that's just like you. You may suppose also how I felt as I heard him detail habits and mysterious peculiarities which were, in fact, those of our beautiful guest, Carmilla. Oh, is she not here? I thought she came. Oh no, she was going to follow with the other governess, right, or maid, and a couple hours later when she got up. That's right. Good point. A vista opened in the forest. We were on a sudden under the chimneys. A vista opened in the forest. We were on a sudden under the chimneys and gables of the ruined village. Yep, I'm gonna guess that's just wrong. And the towers and battlements of the dismantled castle, round which gigantic trees are grouped, overhung us from a slight eminence. In a frightened dream, I got down from the carriage, and in silence, for we had each abundant matter for thinking, we soon mounted the ascent and were among the spacious chambers, winding stairs, and dark corridors of the castle. And this was once the palatial residence of the Karnsteins, said the old general at length, as from a great window he looked out across the village and saw the wide, undulating expanse of forest. It was a bad family, and here its blood-stained annals were written. He continued, "It is hard that they should, after death, continue to plague the human race with their atrocious lusts. That is the chapel of the Karnsteins down there." He pointed down to the grey walls of the Gothic building partly visible through the foliage, a little way down the steep. "And I hear the axe of a woodman," he added, "busy among the trees that surround it. He possibly may give us the information of which I am in search, and point out the grave of Mircalla, Countess of Karnstein. These rustics preserve the local traditions of great families, whose stories die out among the rich and titled so soon as the families themselves become extinct. We have a portrait at home of Mircalla, the Countess Karnstein. Should you like to see it?" asked my father. "Time enough, dear friend," replied the general. "I believe that I have seen the original, and one motive which has led me to you earlier than I at first intended was to explore the chapel which we are now approaching." "What? See Countess Mircalla?" exclaimed my father. "Why, she has been dead more than a century." "Not so dead as you fancy, I am told," answered the general. "I confess, General, you puzzle me utterly," replied my father, looking at him. "I fancied for a moment with a return of the suspicion I detected before, but although there was anger and detestation at times in the old general's manner, there was nothing flighty. There remains to me," he said, as we passed under the heavy arch of the Gothic church, for its dimensions would have justified its being so styled, "but one object which can interest me during the few years that remain to me on earth, and that is to wreak on her the vengeance which, I thank God, may still be accomplished by a mortal arm." "What vengeance can you mean?" asked my father in increasing amazement. "I mean to decapitate the monster," he answered, with a fierce flush and a stamp that echoed mournfully through the hollow ruin, as his clenched hand was at the same moment raised as if it grasped the handle of an axe, while he shook it ferociously in the air. "What?" exclaimed my father, more than ever bewildered. And why he's so stunned is because their ads are coming up. He's like, "Not now. You can't have ads now. We're about to find out some information." That's crazy. That's what's going on in his head. Crazy that he knew at this moment in time in this story that we would be stopping for ads. And we are. So we'll be back in 3 minutes. I'd rather have donuts than anticipation. Thank you very much. Thank you. And everybody else, welcome back from the advertisements. There we go. I have this burp that's sitting just under my tummy. It won't come out. It'll surprise us, I'm sure. Lexi, where are we? "What?" exclaimed my father, more than ever bewildered. "To strike her head off." "Cut her head off?" "Oh, no, that's not a question. To strike her head off. Cut her head off." I don't know who's saying this. Neither one of these is a question, so... "Aye, with a hatchet, or with a spade, or with anything that can cleave through her murderous throat. You shall hear." He answered, trembling with rage, and hurrying forward, he said, "That beam will answer for a seat. Your dear child is fatigued. Let her be seated, and I will, in a few sentences, close my dreadful story." The squared block of wood which lay on the grass-grown pavement of the chapel formed a bench on which I was very glad to seat myself. And in the meantime, the general called to the woodman. The general called to the woodman, who had been removing some boughs which leaned upon the old walls, and, axe in hand, the hardy old fellow stood before us. He could not tell us anything of these monuments, but there was an old man, he said, a ranger of this forest, at present sojourning in the house of the priest, about 2 miles away, who could point out every monument of the old Karnstein family, and, for a trifle, he undertook to bring him back with him, if we would lend him one of our horses in little more than half an hour. "Have you been long employed about this forest?" asked my father of the old man. "I have been a woodman here," he answered in his patois, "under the forester all my days. So has my father before me, and so on, as many generations as I can count up. I could show you the very house in the village here in which my ancestors lived." "How came the village to be deserted?" asked the general, who should know this by now, frankly. "It was troubled by revenants, sir. Several were tracked to their graves. They're detected by the usual tests and extinguished in the usual way, by decapitation, by the stake, and by burning. But not until many of the villagers were killed. But after all these proceedings according to law," he continued, "so many graves opened and so many vampires deprived of their horrible animation, the village was not relieved. But a Moravian noble, who happened to be traveling this way, heard how matters were, and being skilled, as many people are in his country, in such affairs, he offered to deliver the village from its tormentor. He did so thus. There, being a bright moon that night, he ascended shortly after sunset the towers of the chapel here, from whence he could distinctly see the churchyard beneath him. You can see it from that window. From this point he watched until he saw the vampire come out of his grave, and place near it in the linen cloths in which he had been folded, and then glide away towards the village to plague its inhabitants. The stranger, having seen all this, came down from the steeple, took the linen wrappings of the vampire, and carried them up to the top of the tower, which he again mounted. When the vampire returned from his prowlings and missed his clothes, he cried furiously to the Moravian, whom he saw at the summit of the tower, and who, in reply, beckoned him to ascend and take them. Whereupon the vampire, accepting his invitation, began to climb the steeple, and so soon as he had reached the battlements, the Moravian, with a stroke of his sword, clove his skull in twain, hurling him down to the churchyard, whither, descending by the winding stairs, the stranger followed and cut his head off. The next day delivered it and the body to the villagers, who duly impaled and burnt them. This Moravian nobleman had authority from then head of the family to remove the tomb of Mircalla, Countess Karnstein, which he did effectually, so that in a little while its site was quite forgotten. "Can you point out where it stood?" asked the general eagerly. The forester shook his head and smiled. "Not a soul living could tell you that now," he said. "Besides, they say her body was removed, but no one is sure of that either." Having thus spoken, as time pressed, he dropped his axe and departed, leaving us to hear the remainder of the general's strange story. Uh-oh. Could the vampires have escaped? Chapter 14. The Meeting. "My beloved child," he resumed, "was now growing rapidly worse. The physician who attended her had failed to produce the slightest impression on her disease, for such I then supposed it to be. He saw my alarm and suggested a consultation. I called in an abler physician from Graz. Several days elapsed before he arrived. He was good and pious, as well as a learned man. Having seen my poor ward together, they withdrew to my library to confer and discuss. I, from the adjoining room where I awaited their summons, heard these two gentlemen's voices raised in something sharper than a strictly philosophical discussion. I knocked at the door and entered. I found the old physician from Graz maintaining his theory. His rival was combating it with undisguised ridicule, accompanied with bursts of laughter. This unseemly manifestations subsided, and the altercation ended on my entrance. "Sir," said my first physician, "my learned brother seems to think that you want a conjurer and not a doctor." "Pardon me," said the old physician from Graz, looking displeased. "I shall state my own view of the case in my own way another time. I grieve, Monsieur le General, that by my skill in science I can be of no use. Before I go, I shall do myself the honor to suggest something to you." He seemed thoughtful, and sat down at a table and began to write. Profoundly disappointed, I made my bow, and as I turned to go, the other doctor pointed over his shoulder to his companion who was writing, and then, with a shrug, significantly touched his forehead. Rude. This consultation then left me precisely where I was. I walked out into the grounds, all but distracted. The doctor from Graz, in 10 or 15 minutes, overtook me. He apologized for having followed me, but said that he could not conscientiously take his leave without a few words more. He told me that he could not be mistaken. No natural disease exhibited the same symptoms, and that death was already very near. There remained, however, a day or two, or possibly two, of life. If the fatal seizure were at once arrested, with great care and skill her strength might possibly return. But all hung now upon the confines of the irrevocable. One more assault might extinguish the last spark of vitality which is every moment ready to die. "And what is the nature of the seizure you speak of?" I entreated. "I have stated all fully in this note, which I place in your hands upon the distinct condition that you send for the nearest clergyman, and open my letter in his presence, and on no account read it till he is with you. You would despise it else, and it is a matter of life and death. Should the priest fail you, then indeed you may read it." He asked me, before taking his leave finally, whether I would wish to see a man curiously learned upon the very subject which, after I had read his letter, would probably interest me above all others, and he urged me earnestly to invite him to visit him there, and so took his leave. "Is it Van Helsing?" Might be a little early for might be Van Helsing's father. That character existed in the other book, right? The ecclesiastic was absent, and I read the letter by myself. At another time or in another case it might have excited my ridicule, but into what quackeries will not people rush for a last chance, where all accustomed means have failed and the life of a beloved object is at stake? She's not an object. Nothing, you will say, could be more absurd than the learned man's letter. It was monstrous enough to have consigned him to a madhouse. He said that the patient was suffering from the visits of a vampire. The punctures which she described as having occurred near the throat were, he insisted, the insertion of those two long, thin, and sharp teeth which, it is well known, are peculiar to vampires, and there could be no doubt, he added, as to the well-defined presence of the small livid mark which all concurred in describing as that induced by the demon's lips, and every symptom described by the sufferer was in exact conformity with those recorded in every case of a similar visitation. being myself wholly skeptical as to the existence of any such portent as the vampires. The supernatural theory of the good doctor furnished, in my opinion, but another instance of learning and intelligence oddly associated with some one hallucination. I was so miserable, however, that rather than try nothing, I acted upon the instructions of the letter. I concealed myself in the dark dressing room that opened upon the poor patient's room, in which a candle was burning, and watched there till she was fast asleep. I stood at the door, peeping through the small crevice, my sword laid on the table beside me, as my directions prescribed, until, a little after 1, I saw a large black object, a very ill-defined, crawl, as it seemed to me, over the foot of the bed, and swiftly spread itself up to the poor girl's throat, where it swelled in a moment into a great palpitating mass. Oh, this must be the scene from the cover of the book. Well, not the cover you see in here, I think, but the cover that I used for the thumbnail, which you haven't seen because I haven't uploaded this to YouTube yet. But yeah, I think that's what this is. For a few moments I had stood petrified. I now sprang forward. With my sword in hand, the black creature suddenly contracted towards the foot of the bed, glided over it, and, standing on the floor about a yard below the foot of the bed, with a glare of sulking ferocity and horror fixed on me, I saw Millarca. Speculating I know not what, I struck at her instantly with my sword, but I saw her standing near the door, unscathed. Horrified, I pursued and struck again. She was gone, and my sword flew to shivers against the door. I can't describe to you all that passed on that horrible night. The whole house was up and stirring. The spectre, Millarca, was gone, but her victim was sinking fast, and before the morning dawned, she died. The old general was agitated. We did not speak to him. My father walked to some little distance and began reading the inscriptions on the tombstones, and thus occupied, he strolled into the door of a side chapel to prosecute his researches. The general leaned against the wall, dried his eyes, and sighed heavily. I was relieved on hearing the voices of Carmilla and Madame, who were at that moment approaching. The voices died away. In this solitude, having just listened to so strange a story, connected as it was with the great entitled dead, whose monuments were mouldering among the dust and ivy round us, and every incident of which bore so awfully upon my own mysterious case in this haunted spot, darkened by the towering foliage that rose on every side, dense and high above its noiseless walls, a horror began to steal over me, and my heart sank as I thought that my friends were, after all, not about to enter and disturb this triste and ominous scene. Tryst, maybe. The old general's eyes were fixed on the ground, as he leaned with his hand upon the basement of a sheltered monument. Under a narrow, arched doorway, surmounted by one of those demoniacal grotesques in which the cynical and ghastly fancy of old Gothic carving delights, I saw very gladly the beautiful face and figure of Carmilla enter the shadowy chapel. I was just about to rise and speak, and nodded smilingly in answer to her peculiarly engaging smile, when, with a cry, the old man by my side caught up to the woodman's hatchet and started forward. On seeing him, a brutalized change came over her features. It was an instantaneous and horrible transformation. As she made a crouching step backwards, before I could utter a scream, he struck at her with all his force. But she dived under his blow, and unscathed caught him in her tiny grasp by the wrist. He struggled for a moment to release his arm, but his hand opened. The axe fell to the ground, and the girl was gone. He staggered against the wall. His gray hair stood upon his head, and the moisture shone over his face as if he were at the point of death. The frightful scene had passed in a moment. The first thing I recollected after is Madame standing before me and impatiently repeating again and again the question, "Where is Mademoiselle Carmilla? Carmilla? Yeah. Yes, where's Carmilla?" I answered at length, "I don't know. I can't tell. She went there." And I pointed to the door through which Madame had just entered, only a minute or two since. "But I have been standing there in the passage ever since Mademoiselle Carmilla entered, and she did not return." And she began to call, "Carmilla," through every door and passage and from the windows, but no answer came. "She called herself Carmilla," answered the general, still agitated. "Carmilla, yes," I answered. "Aye," he said. "That is Millarca. That is the same person who long ago was called Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. Depart from this accursed ground, my poor child, as quickly as you can. Drive to the clergyman's house and stay there till we come. Begone. May you never behold Carmilla more. You will not find her here." Hello, Doom. Yes, may the fourth be with you. Yes, and may the revenge of the fifth not come for you. Chapter 15, Ordeal and Execution. As he spoke, one of the strangest-looking men I ever beheld entered the chapel at the door through which Carmilla had made her entrance and her exit. He was tall, narrow-chested, stooping, with high shoulders, and dressed in black. His face was brown and dried with deep furrows, and he wore an oddly shaped hat with a broad leaf. His hair, long and grizzled, hung on his shoulders. He wore a pair of gold spectacles and walked slowly, with an odd shambling gait, with his face sometimes turned up to the sky and sometimes bowed down towards the ground. Seemed to wear a perpetual smile. His long, thin arms were swinging, and his lank hands in old black gloves, ever so much too wide for them, waving and gesticulating in utter abstraction. "The very man," exclaimed the general, advancing with manifest delight. "My dear Baron, how happy I am to see you. I had no hope of meeting you so soon." He signed to my father, who had by this time returned, and leading the fantastic old gentleman, whom he now called the Baron, to meet him. He introduced them formally, and they at once entered into earnest conversation. The stranger took a roll of paper from his pocket and spread it on the worn surface of a tomb that stood by. He had a pencil case in his fingers, with which he traced imaginary lines from point to point on the paper, which, from their often glancing at it together at certain points of the building, I concluded to be a plan of the chapel. He accompanied what I may term his lecture with occasional readings from a dirty little book whose yellow leaves were closely written over. They sauntered together down the side aisle, opposite to the spot where I was standing, conversing as they went. Then they began measuring distances by paces, and finally they all stood together, facing a piece of the side wall, which they began to examine with great minuteness, pulling off the ivy that clung over it, and rapping the plaster with the ends of their sticks, scraping here and knocking there. At length they ascertained the existence of a broad marble tablet, with letters carved in relief upon it. With the assistance of the woodman, who soon returned, a monumental inscription, and carved Escutcheon? Escutcheon. It's Escutcheon. It's Escutcheon. We're gonna move past that word. No, we're not. I'm gonna look that up, because this word is stupid. Remember when I used to cancel words? I think basically we just cancel the entire French language. That's pretty good too. Its heraldry, a shield or shield-shaped emblem displaying the coat of arms, or its furniture, a metal plate surrounds a keyhole. No pronunciation guide for a Sid. Okay, well, screw you then. To hell with you. Okay, yeah, with the assistance of the woodmen, who soon returned, a monumental inscription and carved escutcheon were disclosed. They proved to be those of the long-lost monument of Mirkala, Countess Karnstein. The old general, though not, I fear, given to the praying mood, raised his hands and eyes to heaven in mute thanksgiving for some moments. "Tomorrow," I heard him say, "the commissioner will be here, and the inquisition will be held according to law." Then turning to the old man with the gold spectacles, whom I have described, he shook him warmly by both hands and said, "Baron, how can I thank you? How can we all thank you? You will have delivered this region from a plague that has scoured its inhabitants for more than a century. The horrible enemy, thank God, is at last tracked." My father led the stranger aside, and the general followed. I know that he had led them out of hearing that he might relate my case, and I saw them glance often quickly at me as the discussion proceeded. My father came to me, kissed me again and again, and leading me from the chapel said, "It is time to return. But before we go home, we must add to our party the good priest, who lives but a little way from this, and persuade him to accompany us to the Skolas." In this quest, we were successful, and I was glad, being unspeakably fatigued when we reached home. But my satisfaction was changed to dismay on discovering that there were no tidings of Carmilla. Of the scene that had occurred in the ruined chapel, no explanation was offered to me, and it was clear that it was a secret which my father for the present determined to keep from me. This sinister absence of, like, you should be able to figure this out yourself, dear. This is like, you've heard all the information. You just have to, use a brain cell. This sinister absence of Carmilla made the remembrance of the scene more horrible to me. The arrangements for the night were singular. 2 servants and madam were to sit up in my room that night, and the ecclesiastic, this word is so cool when you say it right. Ecclesiastic, yeah, and the ecclesiastic with my father kept watch in the adjoining dressing room. Of course, you gotta be proper, I guess. You can't watch a lady sleep. The priest had performed certain solemn rites that night, the purport of which I did not understand any more than I comprehended the reason of this extraordinary precaution taken for my safety during sleep. I saw all clearly a few days later. The disappearance of Carmilla was followed by the discontinuance of my nightly sufferings. You have heard, no doubt, of the appalling superstition that prevails in Upper and Lower Styria, or in Moravia, Silesia, in Turkish Serbia, in Poland, even in Russia, the superstition, so we must call it, of the vampire. If human testimony, taken with every care and solemnity, judicially and before commissions innumerable, each consisting of many members, all chosen for integrity and intelligence, and constituting reports of more voluminous, perhaps, than exist upon any one other class of cases, is worth anything, it is difficult to deny or even to doubt the existence of such a phenomenon as the vampire. That's like, I guess, a form of appeal to authority. Also, if that were the case, everyone would know of and be convinced of this, and you wouldn't have to ridicule people who bring up the possibility. So I really don't think this is the case. This is just a lie, even in this story, even in this world. For my part, I have heard no theory by which to explain what I myself have witnessed and experienced, other than that supplied by the ancient and well-attested belief of the country. The next day, the formal proceedings took place in the chapel of Karnstein. The grave of the Countess Mircalla was opened, and the general and my father recognized each his perfidious and beautiful guest, in the face now disclosed to view. The features, though 150 years had passed since her funeral, were tinted with the warmth of life. Her eyes were open. No cadaverous smell exhaled from the coffin. The two medical men, one officially present, the other on part of the prompter of the inquiry, attested the marvelous fact that there was a faint but appreciable respiration, and a corresponding action of the heart. The limbs were perfectly flexible, the flesh elastic, and the leaden coffin floated with blood, in which to a depth of 7 inches the body lay immersed. That's pretty cool. They sleep with their eyes open, but they sleep in a pool of blood. Here then were all the admitted signs and proofs of vampirism. The body, therefore, in accordance with the ancient practice, was raised, and a sharp stake driven through the heart of the vampire, who uttered a piercing shriek at the moment, in all respects such as might escape from a living person in the last agony. Then the head was struck off, and a torrent of blood flowed from the severed neck, like the Blade movie. Cozy blood pool bed? Yep, absolutely. I hope it stays warm. That would be kind of... Wake up in a pool of scabby black blood. like gross. The body and head was next placed on a pile of wood and reduced to ashes, which were thrown upon the river and borne away, and that territory has never since been plagued by the visits of a vampire. My father has a copy of the report of the Imperial Commission, with the signatures of all who were present at these proceedings, attached in verification of the statement. It is from this official paper I have summarized my account of this last shocking scene. Okay, all right. Chapter 16, Conclusion. This is probably the last chapter, I guess. I write all this, you suppose, with composure, but far from it. I cannot think of it without agitation. Nothing but your earnest desire, so repeatedly expressed, could have induced me to sit down to a task that has unstrung my nerves for months to come, and re-induced a shadow of the unspeakable horror which years after my deliverance continued to make my days and nights dreadful, and solitude insupportably terrific. Blood pudding. Yeah, it's blood pudding. Let me add a word or two about the quaint Baron Vordenberg, to whose curious lore we were indebted for the discovery of the Countess Mircalla's grave. He had taken up his abode in Graz, where, living upon a mere pittance, which was all that remained to him of the once princely estates of his family in Upper Styria, he devoted himself to the minute and laborious investigation of the marvelously authenticated tradition of vampirism. He had at his fingers' ends all the great and little works upon the subject. Magia Posthuma, Felgon de Mirabilibus, Mirabilibus, Augustinus de Cura pro Mortius. Fuck you, book. Philosophica et Christianae cogitationes de vampiris, by John Christopher Ehrenberg, sure, and 1,000 others. Okay, I give myself +2 points for trying, and probably a D for failing. Yeah. Latin, yeah. I should have sung it. I did okay. I don't have to say that. You just say I did great. I did fantastic. You know how long? Like, what is like that? This word here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 letters. That one is 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's only like 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 10. That's probably 10. Yeah, that's probably the biggest one. The Philosophicae. 13 letters. You did Greek. What's that? Kleti Barada Nikto. Nikto. Barada. And Kleti. Or is it Kleati? Double consonants or vowels. They're vowels. Christian philosophy, yeah. If you say so. It's all Greek to me. Where the hell was I? And 1,000 others, among which I remember only a few of those which he lent to my father. He had a voluminous digest of all the judicial cases, from which he had extracted a system of principles that appear to govern, some always and others occasionally only, the condition of the vampire. I may mention in passing that the deadly pallor attributed to that sort of revenants is a mere melodramatic fiction. They present in the grave, and when they show themselves in human society, the appearance of healthy life. When disclosed to light in their coffins, they exhibit all the symptoms that are enumerated as those which prove the vampire life of the long-dead Countess Karnstein. How they escaped from their graves and returned to them for certain hours every day without displacing the clay or leaving any trace of disturbance in the state of the coffin or the cerements has always been admitted to be utterly inexplicable. The amphibious existence of the vampire is sustained by daily renewed slumber in the grave. It does say amphibious. Its horrible lust for living blood supplies the vigor of its waking existence. Oh, we have a raid, and absolutely no sound for it, which makes sense. We're in a reading stream. Hello, Otter. Welcome back, friend. Thank you once again for visiting us with your friends. What were you playing? Oh, the crime scene cleaner. Yes, you were doing that. I went and took a look at one or two of those. I hope you had a good time tonight. Look out for shooting stars. It's an otter raid, which makes no sense in a normal world. But, you know, we're far from living in a normal world. Welcome in, everybody. My name is Sidoen. I'm a librarian. I sit here in this little library of mine and I read stories on Monday nights. Other nights I play other games. We're doing like Deep Rock Galactic, Space Marines and 2 or Helldivers 2 nowadays. But yeah, Mondays is reserved for reading, which is what we're doing today. We are just coming to the end of Carmilla, and we'll be starting. Oh dear, I hate words. Why do I keep closing this? It's 7 stars. The Jewel of 7 stars. Kind of crazy. You enjoy the cleaning games? I hope so. You play them a lot. I hope you had a good time tonight. Yeah, of course, you need to go attend to your after stream care. Please feel free to do so. Same with anyone else. If you've been on a long time or a short time and you need to go or you want to go, by all means, please feel free to do so. No judgment. Yeah. Well, otherwise, please feel free to lurk and listen to the rest of the story. Yeah. I'll be here reading. I'm the streamer. This is I need a chair. I think I need a chair. I don't have a chair. I just have a big book. It's so my eyes can read them. The words, they're hard. All right. Let's see. Where are we? We're in the concluding chapter, so we're doing some wrap-up, I think. Its horrible lust for living blood supplies the vigor of its waking existence. The vampire is prone to be fascinated with an engrossing vehemence resembling the passion of love by particular persons. In pursuit of these, it will exercise inexhaustible patience and stratagem, for access to a particular object may be obstructed in 100 ways. It will never desist until it has satiated its passion and drained the very life of its coveted victim. Big high and winged back chair. Yeah, something super comfy though. Adjustable, of course, and very ergonomic is important. But it will, in these cases, husband and protract its murderous enjoyment with the refinement of an epicure, and heighten it by the gradual approaches of an artful courtship. In these cases, it seems to yearn for something like sympathy and consent. In ordinary ones, it goes direct to its object, overpowers with violence, and strangles and exhausts often at a single feast. The vampire is, apparently, subject in certain situations to special conditions. In the particular instance of which I have given you a relation, Mircalla seemed to be limited to a name which, if not her real one, should at least reproduce without the omission or addition of a single letter those, as we say, anagrammatically which compose it. Carmilla did this. So did Milarca. My father related to the Baron Vordenberg, who remained with us for 2 or 3 weeks after the expulsion of Carmilla, the story about the Moravian nobleman and the vampire at Karnstein churchyard. And then he asked the Baron how he had discovered the exact position of the long-concealed tomb of the Countess Mircalla. The Baron's grotesque features puckered up into a mysterious smile. He looked down, still smiling, on his worn spectacle case and fumbled with it. Then looking up, he said, "I have many journals and other papers, written by that remarkable man. The most curious among them is one treating of the visit which you speak of to Karnstein. The tradition, of course, discolors and distorts a little. He might have been termed a Moravian nobleman, for he had changed his abode to that territory and was, beside, a noble. But he was, in truth, a native of Upper Styria. It is enough to say that in very early youth he had been a passionate and favored lover of the beautiful Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. Her early death plunged him into inconsolable grief. It is the nature of vampires to increase and multiply, but according to an ascertained and ghostly law. Assume, at starting, a territory perfectly free from that pest. How does it begin? How does it multiply itself? I will tell you. A person, more or less wicked, puts an end to himself. A suicide, under certain circumstances, becomes a vampire. That specter visits living people in their slumbers. They die, and almost invariably in the grave, develop into vampires. This happened in the case of the beautiful Mircalla, who was haunted by one of those demons. My ancestor, Vordenberg, whose title I still bear, soon discovered this, and, in the course of the studies to which he devoted himself, learned a great deal more. Among other things, he concluded that suspicion of vampirism would probably fall, sooner or later, upon the dead countess, who, in life, had been his idol. He conceived a horror, be she what she might, of her remains being profaned by the outrage of a posthumous execution. He has left a curious paper to prove that the vampire, on its expulsion from its amphibious existence, is projected into a far more horrible life, and he resolved to save his once beloved Mircalla from this. He adopted the stratagem of a journey here, a pretended removal of her remains, and a real obliteration of her monument. When age had stolen upon him, and from the veil of years he looked back on the scenes he was leaving, he considered, in a different spirit, what he had done, and a horror took possession of him. He made the tracings and notes which have guided me to the very spot, and drew up a confession of the deception that he had practiced. If he had intended any further action in this matter, death prevented him, and the hand of a remote descendant has too late for many directed the pursuit to the lair of the beast. We talked a little more, and among other things he said was this. One sign of the vampire is the power of the hand. The slender hand of Mircalla closed like a vice of steel on the general's wrist when he raised the hatchet to strike, but its power is not confined to its grasp. It leaves a numbness in the limbs it seizes, which is slowly, if ever, recovered from. The following spring my father took me a tour through Italy. We remained away for more than a year. It was, oh my, I wish I could spend a year on a friggin' holiday. It was long before the terror of recent events subsided, and to this hour the image of Carmilla returns to memory with ambiguous alterations. Sometimes the playful, languid, beautiful girl, sometimes the writhing fiend I saw in the ruined church. And often, from a reverie I have started, fancying I heard the light step of Carmilla at the drawing-room door. I guess she'll never recover. But that is the end. That means I have to come up with a second backup book. This story, I mean, I think a lot of people like this. This predates Dracula, and you can see they kind of just tagged on a few extra vampire powers or characteristics in the end here. Some of it kind of has leached over into, and we compare this to D&D a lot, like the monster humanity, the undead, like the whole numbness thing becomes a thing that was never really part of the story. Her powerful hand was, as described there, she grabbed the general's wrist after the general attacked her in the tomb or the catacomb or wherever they were, the church. But it's a very simple story. Yeah. It describes a bunch of the mysterious behaviors of the vampires, I suppose. It's not memorable. Well, there's one thing for those who just showed up. This is we started reading this in the previous readings on last Monday. We read, I guess, 2/3 of it, and I didn't really remember any of it, which is a little strange. We are going to take a little break though, and when we get back, we are going to read a different story. We're going to start, as I said, we'll begin, the Jewel of 7 Stars, and I will dread having to edit the video for this, because it is one VOD, because it will have 2 stories in it, and the markers they do not do justice. So we're going to throw ads on because they're going to show up in 14 minutes anyways while we step away, and we'll be 3 or 5 minutes before we get back. So see you soon.